Welcome to Easy Peasy Books, From Author to Authority, the lively and engaging podcast for business professionals who've always believed they have a book in them. I'm your host, Jillian Whitney. Join me as I chat with authors and industry experts from all around the world to explore simple strategies to write, publish, and leverage your business book. Whether you're an entrepreneur, executive, or an employee, this podcast is for you. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Easy Peasy Books podcast. And today I have a very special guest who I have known in the comments, in the DMs for a while on LinkedIn. But today I actually get to meet her in person, which is so fun because she is on the other side of the world and she has an amazing story to tell. We have an amazing episode for you today. Really different topic. But before I get stuck in, we get stuck in with our topic, I would like Linda to go ahead and introduce herself and tell people who she is and what she does, and then we'll start talking.
Great. Thank you, Gillian. Thank you for the lovely introduction. And I'm also very pleased to finally meet you kind of in person. As Gillian said, I'm based the other side of the pond. I'm in the Czech Republic in Prague, and I'm originally from Yorkshire in the UK, in England. And I'm an academic editor first and foremost, but I do all kinds of copy editing. So sometimes articles, particularly in the social sciences, sometimes theses, and I've done quite a lot of book editing, mostly non-fiction, including some business books and also some fiction. And sometimes original English books written in English and sometimes translations.
Wonderful. I love it. And it's great. And you have lived in, you're kind of competing with me for being a traveling person because I travel all over the world. I've lived in many places, but I love that you went from Yorkshire. By the way, I have family in Yorkshire. So I love that Yorkshire countryside with the
lovely.
And the walls, and it's just so beautiful. And then you went to Scotland. And then you went, where did I put my notes? You went to Prague, and you're actually a dual citizen, correct? You have Czech and UK citizenship?
Yes. And I believe you have 4 citizenships or something like that.
I do. I have 4. I'm beating you on that one.
Wow. Yeah, you have. You've bet me there. Yeah, I've been in Prague for 21 years now, and I got my citizenship just over 4 years ago. So I'm really pleased to have that, and particularly because it's EU citizenship since Brexit. So I'm back in the EU. It was a lot of work with language tests and so on, but it was a lot of paperwork, but it was definitely worth it.
I love that. So tell us how many languages do you speak? What besides English? What are the languages that you speak?
Yeah, it depends how well you consider speaking the language, but I speak German fluently. I've also lived in Germany for 10 years, and that's my main working language. I also translate from German into English. And then Czech, kind of okay, B2 level, whatever. And I edit books translated from Czech. And I've actually edited more books translated from Czech than German, and one of my colleagues says it's probably because there's not that many English native speakers who are professional editors and understand Czech, and there are a lot with German, so that's probably the reason. And then I studied French and Russian earlier, so they're both kind of passive now, but I understand better than I speak. And I've been dabbling in a few other languages like Dutch and Finnish because I'm a member of the Nordic Editors and Translators Association, and I was also a member of an association in the Netherlands, so I just tried to learn a little bit. And Dutch is quite easy if you know German and English, but Finnish is very different to any other language I've ever come across. It's got some parallels with, it's quite close to Estonian, which I don't know, and it's in the same family as Hungarian, but it's difficult, but I like difficult languages. Czech's also difficult. And the Finns have a lot of consonants, so we could do with some of those, and they could have our vowels.
That's good. We could do a little bit of
We can have their vowels. Sorry, there's a lot of double vowels in Finnish, and there never is. No doubles hardly in Czech. And
I love that. I love that. So, can you take us back and tell us how did you get like did your family like are you just Yorkshire, you just learned English and then decided you wanted to learn all these languages? Like how did you go from Yorkshire to where you are today?
yeah, good question. Well, first of all, I just moved up to Scotland to study, originally in Stirling, and I studied French and German. And at school, we had a choice between German and Spanish as a second language. And my mum's mother was actually German, but she came to the UK, to England after the war, and she actually pretended to be Dutch because of the situation at the time. So my mum didn't actually speak German. She learned a little bit later, but she encouraged me to go towards German. My own reason for learning German rather than Spanish was that French and Spanish are similar, and I'll confuse them. And then after studying, I went to Leipzig, which was still East Germany. I just wanted to go somewhere different. And I didn't particularly choose Leipzig, but I thought everyone will probably go for Berlin. So I'll just see where I land. And I landed there for a few years. And then after that, I spent some time in France too, a couple of years in Nice teaching English, and then to Russia. And it was a very different Russia to now, of course, before Putin. And I had a really good time there. And Prague actually came to Prague directly from Berlin. So it's only a few hours up the road on the train or up the rail tracks. And I've been back to Berlin quite a lot since I moved.
And how long have you been in Prague now?
21 years. Yeah. I didn't really expect that, but it happened. And I really love the Central European location too. It's very easy to travel from here as well. And you can have a nice lifestyle.
It's on my bucket list to travel to Prague. So it's like I'm going to come see you anyway. So I'm setting the intentions.
Yeah.
I read that Dan Brown book and I'm hooked. So I had to come to Prague.
Yeah, the secret of secrets. Yeah, you mentioned that. So we can definitely have a beer or a coffee or something.
I love that. I love that. So let's talk about, you primarily help people who want to write a book, academics primarily wanting to write, but their first language is not English, but they want to write in English. Am I correct in saying that? And so how do you do that? Okay. So do you help them write the book in English or translate the book? Is there a difference? How does that all work?
Yeah, if they're non-native speakers, sometimes they are translated and sometimes they write originally in English. And mostly I've just done the copy editing, so the content's already been set. But I did also do some developmental editing for an author here, but an English native speaker. And then we all had a meeting and put ideas together on Post-its, basically, and took it from there. And I went through 3 stages, the content or developmental editing, and then copy editing, and then a final proof. But normally I just do the copy editing. And if I see something in the content that I would suggest changing, I'll write a comment and I do fact checking and things like that. But I have a manuscript that's more or less ready to go usually. So I'm kind of making changes to the style. There's not really usually grammatical errors or anything, but there might be the occasional typo. And it's helping the author and sorry, go on.
No, go ahead. I think we have a little bit of a delay, but that's okay. That's okay.
Yeah, okay. The changes I make are just suggestions, so I really emphasize that to the authors that I track the changes, I write comments, or I highlight something if it's not clear to me. And I might ask, did you mean this, or did you mean that, or did you mean something different? And it's up to them what changes they accept or which ones they reject. If it's their own particular style or voice or their idiosyncrasies and they don't want to change it, it's their decision. The author always has the final word.
And I think that's important, is the author's voice, whether we're talking about something that is, written in English or translated into English. It's like you somehow want to retain that author's voice. And that's where it's always a bit of a dance with editing, because it's like you want to suggest a word, but maybe that's a word that's not familiar with them. It's not comfortable, or they just, I don't even know what that means. So have you ever run into that?
Yeah. There was one example. I was talking about this with someone recently. It was an academic article by an American colleague here at the university. And he wrote something about this as chalked up to whatever. And I said attributed to. And he said, everyone says attributed to. I want to leave it as it is. And then I said, yeah, fine. That's your style. And other authors have said they have their own idiosyncrasies and, they don't want me to edit that out. And I think once you've edited a few papers or a few chapters or whatever by one author, you kind of get to know their style. And it's much more difficult if I edit a book by lots of different authors, because you have to get into each one from scratch.
Yes.
But I do try not to change the author's voice.
I think that's so
the most important thing, really.
Absolutely. Because I was going to say, this is the book that I wrote with Tiina Järvet, and Tina's Estonian. And she speaks, I don't know, she speaks like 12 languages or 13 or 14 languages. She speaks so many languages. And I remember when we were co-writing the book together, we said, well, how do we deal with having such diverse author voices? And, I speak one way, Tiina speaks another way. She's a non-native English speaker. And so we had to kind of figure out how to do that. And literally, we came up with the idea of like making it like a play. Jillian says, Tiina says, and if you read that, like it's me versus Tiina all the way through it. And that was the only way we could come up with it, because to try and make it something in the middle, it wouldn't have been either one of us. It was really challenging.
Yeah, I'd like to read that book. I watched the podcast of you two, and that's on my list now, a book to read. And especially because I'm also very interested in public speaking and some courses on that. So it'll give me some more material, some more tips.
Absolutely.
That's great.
Absolutely. So if you had somebody that was trying to write, and they said, okay, I'm trying to write this book, and I'm a little nervous because I don't feel comfortable because I'm not a native English speaker. Would you suggest that they what would you coach them on? Would you suggest write it like, do we have to think in a language first, and then write it and then translate it? Like, what would you suggest for somebody that was struggling with that?
Yeah, I would say try to write it in English and don't write it in your own language and stick it through DeepL or something like that, because the result won't be as good. But you can use these tools to help you. But I usually notice if I think an author's done that, where they usually write really well and then suddenly there's something that's not as well written. And I would also say get a draft done as soon as possible and then go back and edit it yourself, and be prepared for the editing to take as long as the writing maybe, or, much longer than you expect. And then I just read a colleague's books. She just wrote 2 books about self-editing, one for nonfiction and one for fiction. And I've got it on my Kindle here, Self-Editing Essentials for Nonfiction. Oh, it doesn't show. But anyway, by Katie Chambers. And it's coming out in paperback soon. And what she encourages authors to do, and I think this is really good advice, is to go through several passes and not try to focus on everything all at once, because this is when authors get overwhelmed and they might just stop and say, I've had enough of this, I'm not going to be able to publish it. So, for example, go through once thinking about the content, and then again about maybe language choice or something, maybe 2 or 3 things on each pass. And then when you get towards the end, you can fix the sort of technical errors like double spaces or punctuation or things like that. And eventually you do have to pass it on to a professional editor. But the more you do yourself, the less work the editor will have, and that will save you money.
I agree. And
editing.
Yes. And it's always good, because it's like when you're, the better you can prepare your manuscript from the editor, you can, take it up. An editor can only take it up several notches. And so the thing is that the better you can give it to them, the better it can kind of continue to climb up for you. But if it's way down here,
Yeah.
it's a lot of work to just get it here. So that's why it's really important to
Yeah.
be the best that you can. That's good.
And then you might need more than one round of editing, but generally it's usually one round of copy editing. I mean, after all the developmental editing, and one final proof, and then maybe a final proof of the galleys in PDF form, but that's not always the editor that does that.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
So have you found there's, when you're working with clients, have you found a difference in, putting on your editing hat when you're working with academic versus business editors, business writers, not editors, authors? So is there any differences when you have to do your editing for academic versus business?
Yes. Sometimes the academic papers are difficult to follow, and sometimes I know the subject pretty well and sometimes not so well, so I have to do a lot of research. And with business books, of course, I still Google things and check things, but it's generally easier to follow for the sort of lay reader, if you like.
No, that makes sense.
And one business book that I edited actually was by an English native speaker, by an Irish friend and colleague of mine. And it's this 6 traits of self-leadership. Again, it doesn't show too well, sorry. And
okay.
There are different things to look out for when it's written by an English native speaker. There are some things like, for example, spelling of your and your that non-native speakers always get right because they've had it drilled into them, but English native speakers, especially if they're writing quickly, can get that wrong. So you tend to look out for different things. And I learn a lot by all of my editing. I mean, whatever the subject, it's really a lifelong learning process.
I agree. You're always learning. Now, in the United States, a lot of times when we're doing editing, we go with the Chicago Manual of Style. It's kind of like our Bible when it comes to editing. What do you use being over in Europe?
Generally, also the Chicago Manual of Style, because a lot of especially articles for journals, they go into US journals and that's what they want. Or the APA style guide as well, quite often. And then sometimes MLA as a one for British English, especially when I used to edit books regularly for the university.
That makes sense.
American and English literature.
And then for spelling.
Also a lot. Oh, yeah, sorry. I was also going to say a lot of the journals have their own specific style guides for, the journal of whatever subject, sociology, for example. So I have to learn a new style guide sometimes for every job, but they're all very similar.
Could you explain, there's a lot of people that might be saying, what's a style guide? Because we can create our own style guides as authors. And, especially if we're working with an editor and, if we're doing a business book, academic book, it doesn't matter. But then there's actual publications that use a style guide. So could you just educate us for a second and tell us what is a style guide?
Yeah. For example, something like the Chicago Manual of Style, there's a new version that comes out regularly every year or so. And it has particular rules like, for example, write out numbers. Write numbers 1 to 99 as figures, as in words, and then 100 onwards as numerals, and all these kind of rules. So if you're editing and using a style guide, you have to check these things as you go along if you're not sure. And the spelling as well. And I usually use Merriam-Webster for US English and either Cambridge or Oxford dictionaries for British English. There's also the Economist style guide, which is an old one and traditional. So it's like you don't decide whether to hyphenate something, you check what's in one of these dictionaries or in the style guide, or whether to capitalize something, all these kind of technical issues.
Which makes so much sense. And it helps you make that decision because if anything, you're looking for consistency all the way through.
Yeah.
So like even with spelling, like it's funny being Canadian, because I was born in Canada, we embrace British spelling when we're in Canada. But then when I moved to the United States, I had to adopt American spelling. And so, and I'm also a UK citizen, and I'm Israeli. So it's like everybody has different spelling. So what I had to figure out was I just have to pick one and be consistent. So I figured, I live in the United States. I might as well go with that. And I had to stop putting U's in everything, color, like you don't have a U in color and all those kind of things. But these are the kind of things that this is why it's important to have an editor and to have those styles worked out in advance because, like we know people, Michelle J. Raymond and Michelle B. Griffin, who wrote a book together. And one of them was Australian and one of them was American. And they had to figure out, well, what spelling are we going to do? Are we going to mix and match all the way through? So these are, so even having a style guide just for this book, this is what we're going to do. And we're going to use these acronyms and not those, and this spelling and this.
Yeah.
It's good to know all that in advance. And people don't realize how much all goes into editing because it's more than just looking for a typo. It's looking for consistency all the way through.
Yeah, and then there's also the serial comma or the Oxford comma, and also Oxford English, which uses the Z spelling rather than the S spelling. And sometimes people think that's just US English, but it's also used in some British English too, if you decide to go for Oxford style.
Yes, yes.
And this is also difficult for me when I'm switching, if I'm editing something that's US English and something that's British English on the same day or whatever, and I have to switch over and remember whether to add serial commas or take them out.
I would imagine, yes. I would imagine that you're constantly, okay, this manuscript, okay, first of all, I'm looking at it and knowing that my author is like German, or this author is from Czech, and just okay, I have to have everything straight. And where am I writing? Where is this going? What's the target? What are the rules I'm going to maintain? So my hat's off to you because that's a lot of juggling.
Yeah. And I do find editing very intensive, like in terms of concentration. Like when I was translating or when I do translation, I can translate for a few hours straight through. But with editing, I usually set a Pomodoro timer for 25 minutes and stop roughly after that amount of time and just have a little break, because otherwise you just start reading and not really concentrating as much. I'm not taking everything in. You really do need to have regular breaks.
No, that absolutely makes sense. So if we were kind of getting back to any non-native English speakers that are sitting here listening to us on the podcast, watching us on the video, doesn't matter. And they said, okay, I'm a little nervous that my English, that I'll be judged, that, somebody like, it's nervous enough writing a book in your own language. It's probably even harder in writing your book in English, if that's not your native language, because there's always the fear that we'll be judged, that people, will criticize and this sort of thing. And yet, on the other hand, you want to encourage people that if you have a message to share, you should write that book. Like, it's like, we need your book. We need the books out in the world. We love the books.
Yeah.
So what advice would you give to somebody who's struggling with that dilemma?
I would say just write it, and it's your message that's important and your content, and you can get someone to help you with the English. And this also happened with an author of a Czech book that was translated into English, a Czech Roma journalist, a sort of memoir about growing up in Prague. And he had it in a drawer for 20 years until a friend encouraged him to finally get it out the drawer and publish it. And he did, and it won an award. And he's glad he did it, I think. So I think that'd be the same with other authors. I can't imagine how difficult it is writing in a foreign language. If I had to write a book in German or Czech, it is another level of difficulty.
What would be your what would you think about encouraging them to maybe just like pick up their phone and talk their book, like try and talk their book in English as much as possible, but just kind of, and if they felt nervous about typing, if they could talk it through, and even if sometimes they say, I don't know the word for such and such, just keep going, because that you can fix, right? We can fix that.
That's a good strategy. And also, if it's a long work and it can be divided up into chapters, there's quite often sometimes even writing, translating and editing all going on in parallel. So you send a chapter at a time to your editor, and then you can have a look at the kind of things they change and tell them if you want to accept these changes or which ones you want to react, and then work on the next chapter and send that. So then both sides are learning and making progress. And I think that can work well, but not with, for example, fiction so much. If it's a detective story or something, that might not work. But non-fiction or business books or something like that, it works really well.
I agree 100%. So I just want to ask you, so what's next for you? You have traveled, you have lived in so many places. You've been in Prague for now, 2 decades. So where do you kind of see yourself going? What's next for you?
Well, I think I'm planning to stay in Prague, but whenever I go on holiday to Croatia, I really like it there and think I'd like to live here. And I'm carrying on with the editing articles and hopefully more books. And also I'm hoping to expand on this developmental editing and what I mentioned about public speaking courses. I'm teaching an intensive course in Germany again in May. And I'm also offering that as coaching to individuals and also online. So, and I enjoy that. I like talking to people and listening to them.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I'm excited for your public speaking course. So is that something you were wanting to do in person, or is that a virtual thing? And who is that for? Who's sort of that target market?
Yeah, good. Yeah. I prefer to do something like that in person, but if someone's based the other side of the pond, for example, that's more difficult. But first of all, I ran that for students at Charles University in Prague, and then on these intensive courses, mostly in Germany in a place called Nordhausen, and for students. But last year I also ran a course for staff, mostly professors. And it's something that with a couple of colleagues, we're going to offer that to our academic clients, to the researchers, particularly PhD candidates, but also any level really. They could also be professors, to present at conferences, for example.
And it's so important.
Feedback.
Yes, it's the feedback, because you can practice for a presentation, but if you're doing it in the confines of your own home and then you have to get out on a stage, there's a big difference. There's a big difference doing that.
Yeah. And I also try to encourage the students to be good audience members and ask questions and make each other feel comfortable. And I really try to focus on confidence building.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. Well, this has been a very enlightening episode today, and I have learned a lot. And I'm just like so in awe of you and where you have traveled, and love your beautiful red hair. You're such a
thank you. I did it specially.
It's just awesome. And it's just so fun to see all the places that you've been and that you'll continue to go, and just keep shining your light out there. So that's just wonderful. So thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed it. You made me feel comfortable, and it's so nice to meet you finally. So I was honored to be invited today.
Awesome. Okay, so we will say goodbye to everybody today, and hope you will join us back the next time for the Easy Peasy Books podcast. Okay, bye everybody. Thank you for tuning in to this edition of Easy Peasy Books, from author to authority. If you found value in today's episode, I'd be grateful if you could leave us a review. It helps other aspiring authors discover our podcast. To learn more about writing, publishing, and leveraging your business book, visit my website at easypeasybooks.com.